Hey, this is Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, the website for fathers, because dads don't always think like moms. And if you're just tuning in, Great Dad Talks is a series of weekly conversations with new and expert fathers, all with a point of view on modern parenting. As a life coach specializing in working with new and experienced dads, I'm always curious about how modern dads and how we are evolving today. You can find more about my coaching and our other resources at greatdad.com/coaching. And today I'm having a conversation I really don't want to have. This is a really painful topic, but we're talking to Doug Parisi. He's the director of training at safedefend.com. And he's a specialist in how to protect our school from mass shootings. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Yeah, I think we're all painfully aware. Maybe the epidemic has given us a little bit of a pause on the shootings, but I think there's been an increase in mass shootings even during the pandemic. It's probably gone down within schools since so many of them are closed. But it's a problem that's never far from a lot of parents' minds, and it's just a tragedy that we have to worry about sending our kids to school, not a place that anybody ever thought that they'd be in danger from this kind of threat. So what we're going to talk about is, I guess, the reality of the situation, and Doug's got some perspective on how worried we should be. So maybe you can sketch out how large the threat is. I mean, is it, like after 9/11, we were all like, we thought there was going to be a terrorist event every week, and of course nothing happened. These types of things do tend to capture the news headlines, but how do they rate versus other potential harm at schools?
So violence in schools has always been around. The introductions of weapons into that seems to be more of a 21st century phenomenon. Our first school shootings were early 1900s. Actually, the first ever recorded school shooting was actually in the 1700s. And so that was the type of thing that it's always been there. It's just, what is it that has made it more pervasive? And I would tell you one of them is the idea of the news cycle. It is definitely on the increase when we look at the FBI, when we look at the statistics for school violence, and specifically mass murders within schools. There's kind of a difference between a mass shooting and a mass murder. I just want to clarify real quick. So when you hear the news talk about it, when you have some sort of gangland violence or argument in the street and multiple people are shot, that is generally classified as a mass shooting, something that arose out of some sort of conflict or something like that, that it wasn't necessarily planned ahead of time.
Right.
You might get some gang violence and things like that that have a plan to it. But what we're talking about when we think of mass murders is the idea that somebody makes a calculated plan, shows up at a location and indiscriminately targets people. That has been on the increase in schools, and that is what has led to this fear that has enveloped so much of our country. One of the things that I would tell you is so important is that we tend to remember the shootings, and we kind of don't remember how long ago they happened. We just always remember them, they were in the past. And so all of the shootings become an amalgam of everything that happened in the last 2 to 3 years.
Right.
People sometimes forget, that the Sandy Hook shooting was, 1999, stuff like that. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Sandy Hook was 2012, Columbine was 1999. But they're like, oh, that was really 9 years ago? I just somehow thought that was, more recent. And so we have a tendency to remember these tragedies in our minds, and then therefore we think of them more pervasively as happening. I think you and I have talked a little bit before we got on air, but I just want to make sure people understand. There's about 120,000 schools, about 18,000 school districts in this country, and we only have a mass murder that takes place in about 15 to 20. I'm not trying to minimize that. What I want people to understand is there's a difference between probability and possibility. The probability that your children will ever be involved in any sort of school violence that involves a weapon is infinitesimally small. But the fact that it's possible means that it is something you should be concerned about and that you should address with your children, especially those of student age.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before about putting it into context with fires, which used to kill lots of people. I mean, not only in schools, but in all kinds of other buildings. But that's a relative. We actively prepare kids and teachers constantly with fire drills, but we don't prepare them as much for these types of events, which now actually occur more often than fires, right?
Correct. As was mentioned, 1958 was the last school fire fatality in the country. That was in Chicago. We've only had about 19 climactic events or tornado type events that have 19 fatalities from climactic events in the last, say, 50 years. But we average about 54 homicides per year in our schools, according to the CDC. And somewhere in the area of 26 to 40 of those deaths occur as a result of mass murder or student-on-student violence. That's one of the biggest issues, real quick, that we probably need to also talk about is the fact that the perpetrator in these events, I think the latest the FBI got out was in 2018 with their numbers, and 86% of school shooters were students. And so what people often think is that if I build a good security system with access controls and strong windows and we lock the doors, that we're going to be fine. But they forget to they fail to realize that the shooter was actually invited in, at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then we locked them and we locked the police out and we locked the shooter inside.
Yeah. It's like the domestic violence or the murder rate is more common among people you actually know than the stranger you're obsessed with keeping out of your neighborhood is usually somebody, sadly, you actually know.
Right.
We were also talking about the issue that comes up for a lot of parents is that they worry, especially their elementary school age kids, they don't want to socialize them with this idea of preparing for a shooting. And I get that, but we do teach them about other traumatic situations, like in the event for preparing for a tornado or for a fire, which could be, just as frightening to a small child as a potential shooter event. So maybe talk a little bit about how you feel about that kind of dichotomy there. I mean, how do kids relate to the discussion of these topics?
Well, and that's what's interesting is that most parents have a more difficult time talking about active shooter training than their students do or their children do. One of the things to think about is we, as you just mentioned, tornadoes, we tell our kids, that's a scary thing for them. Fire is a very scary thing for them. We talk to them about things like stranger danger or, the possibilities of somebody talking to them. We talk to our children about inappropriate touching by adults, so these are conversations we're willing to have. But somehow we don't talk to them about quicksand, which I wish my parents had, because I swear I grew up with a much greater fear of quicksand ending my life than so many other things. But we have this fear of talking to our children about somebody entering a building intent to do harm when it's a little more likely than some of those other events are. And so that's where we need to get past our fear. You and I kind of joked around before, like I grew up on a military base, so we prepared for nuclear attacks by getting under a desk with the book over our head, and we did the stop, drop, and roll and practice those sort of things. I don't remember ever being scared of that. It was just something somebody told me, and it planted a seed of information in front of me.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I can remember more vividly my mother being obsessively worried about it than I can remember the drill or feeling worried about the possibility of it actually happening.
Right. And what's funny is, I shouldn't say funny, but what's interesting about this is that we normalize certain things. I'm sure you've flown recently, or you've flown in your life. Most everybody has. The first thing they tell you when they start to shut the doors is how to get out of that thing, how to get out of the plane in an emergency, where to look for the exit, stuff like that. But none of us are so traumatized. We're like, I'm never going to fly again. If that thing crashed, this is that was a horrible plan. But somehow we accept that as normal. And active shooter type training or hostile intruder or threat scenarios are okay to talk with your children and just say, hey, if anything ever happens, if an alarm goes off, or if you hear something over the web, the thing, and the teacher starts telling you to do it, do what the teacher tells you, stuff like that. My biggest fear is that when parents decide, I'm going to go outside the norm of what the school is teaching and tell my kid to do their own thing. And the best example I can give you of this is that we know a school that did a drill, and some of the students decided they wanted to leave. These were some 8th graders. And they were like, my dad told me to get out of the building. And the teacher's like, no, we need to go on to lockdown. So now you have a situation where the teacher's trying to get everybody into the safer corner, and the teacher's trying to secure the door. And then 3 boys are trying to get out of the building because their dads had told them that running was the best option. And so the most important thing that the parents need to know is what the plan is from the school. Like, is the school, do they give the teacher the option to leave, or do they go immediately to the lockdown? And then have a discussion with your kid. Did you guys, my school district that my children go to, we get an email that says we did a crisis drill. So I ask them, what was the crisis? Did they tell you what the drill was? Stuff like that. Because there's different types of crisis, right? Something's happening in the parking lot. We're going to lock the building down. that sort of thing. We've got something going on in the building, so we're going to practice locking down at the classroom level, right? And so I talk to my kids about that. I let them know those sort of things, and we talk about that. I ask my kids, I say, hey, how many of your classrooms have a door that is an exterior door? That if there was a bad person at the classroom door, do you have an option to leave that classroom? Well, about half the classes do have an exterior door, and half of them don't, right? You said you're in San Francisco. What's interesting is, this is a nationwide podcast, so you have to understand, you and I, we tend to be homogeneous in the way we think of our schools, and we think of the ones that our kids go to. But got to remember, schools up in the north, they don't have as many outbuildings. Right. Whereas, like in Florida, they'll have, Parkland, best example, they had 13 different buildings with awnings. So if you're in a different building where the crisis is happening, it's better to stay inside. If you're in the same building as the crisis, it's probably better to get out. But if you're 3 stories above the crisis and it's happening on the first floor, you don't want to run into it. But if it's happening on the 3rd floor, you definitely want to take the opportunity to get out. So these are conversations you have to have with kids, because it's so much more complex than a simple fire or tornado drill. I guess I would ask you, Paul, if the building was on fire, what are you going to do?
If my building or their building?
Your building. I just mean you're going to get out, right?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. Here in the Midwest, if there's a tornado, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the secure areas, right? What do you do in an active shooter situation? It depends. It always depends on the circumstances of where it is, what's going on, that sort of stuff. And so that's why we need to have that conversation with our kids, because we have to empower them to be able to think through the process. The other most important thing to talk to your kids about is, if something were to ever happen and they were not in the classroom, let's say they're in the cafeteria, let's say they've gone to the bathroom, let's say they're in the library, you need to talk to your kids. Well, what do you think you would do in that situation? And it's very important, if you're having that conversation, that you know what your kid's school looks like. So you need to go stand in the library and say, do you see there's 2 exits to the outside? And do you see that there's an office or a supply closet where they keep the copier and you could secure in that room? And so these are conversations parents can very easily have with their kids. And they don't always have to go to the school, but they should ask their kids to look around and say, if you're in the library, just sit down with your book and or your laptop and look around and say, if something bad happened, where would I go? I'll either go to the exit or I'll go to that office. And that's the type of stuff you can have your conversation with the kid. And it's not going to traumatize them.
Yeah, I think it sounds traumatizing when you talk about it, if you're constantly aware, but as an adult, you're kind of situationally aware. You're not thinking like when you go to the movie theater, you're not looking like where are my possible exits, but you subconsciously, that's why the exit signs are green and they're lit up. So you kind of subconsciously have noted where to go. It does kind of scare me if you're telling your kid throughout the day, every room you go into, for plan your escape route. Sounds a little well,
right. This is like a once a semester conversation with your kid. Now, I'll be honest with you. And I like to think that I raised 3 healthy, normal kids, but my kids, we'd walk into Walmart and my kids would say, hey, can we go to the toy section? And I would say, yes, we can. But the first thing that we have to do, you show me where the exits are. And the reason is that you move so far away from the front door that if something were to happen, I want my kids to understand that. What's so important with kids is that some of the times we'd get back there and you'd see a sign that said exit, and then there was another sign that says employees only. Well, a 5-year-old doesn't know that there's a difference between an exit and an emergency and an employees only sign, so that they are allowed to use that door in an emergency. But that's a conversation the parent needs to have with them. And so that's one of the things I do talk about in my training is that I do actually have my kids go around and look around. We have been to concert venues. I've taken my kids to concerts, basketball games, sporting events in large arenas, Big 12 tournaments, stuff like that. And I do point out to my kids that, hey, if something were to happen, our closest exit is probably going to go 20 rows down onto the basketball floor and then head for one of those exits down there, as opposed to trying to run back up the stairs and go back through the building the way we came. So I will have that conversation with them. We had a conversation with my daughter. We went to a concert at Municipal Auditorium, and they had the big awning, the kind of behind the stage. And we just happened to be kind of to the left of the stage. And I said, we are about 50 feet away from the awning. And so if something happened here, we're going to go that way. And, I kind of showed her how the auditorium is built the same way, that they're going to have the same exits on both sides, right? Right. And so I said, so that's what we'll do is we'll use one of those exits. And so she said, okay. And it's just something my kids have learned to expect from me, is that dad is going to point out where the exits are when we walk into restaurants or malls or things like that, And it's just one of those things about, being prepared. And
Yeah.
it's not scary. It's just something that kids actually start to do. And then I encourage my kids to just point it out on their own. And so we would, my daughter and I went to a restaurant inside of a mall. And so that's a very situation, because you really are only thinking that one exit right outside the front to get back into the mall. But my daughter noticed there was an emergency exit at the back. She goes, "There's the exit." I said, "Thanks." It was by the bathrooms.
Yeah, I think we all think like the exit we know is the entrance that we came into, and just having that little thought of, no, that's not the only way to get out, and might not be the closest in those types of situations. But it is an interesting thing to think about, adding that to your list of fatherly duties. Obviously, you're in the business, so you're thinking about this all the time. I must admit that I quite often made sure the kids knew what to do in case of some sort of other type, like more that they'd get lost and they'd ask somebody. They'd either ask a mom or somebody in a uniform for help and advice. But I never told them, or I told them where to meet in case we got separated. But I never said, in case of a nuclear disaster, run to the exit that I presented you with.
Yeah, and and that's what's interesting is when I go back to the plane analogy, the reason they're telling you to look for the exits is because sometimes the exit is 2 rows behind you, and the closer exit's 2 rows behind you instead of the 15 rows up front. But we came in through that one door, walked to our first seat, and we didn't even look around. So that's the type of stuff they're just asking you to prepare yourself for it. When you talk about you made a great point with, we tell our kids to look for police or somebody in uniform. And that's one of the problems that we actually do have in school shootings, is because the law enforcement officers, the first men and women that are on scene, their role is to neutralize that shooter. It's not to assist the wounded. It's not to evacuate those in crisis. There's a video that I can't. There was an active shooter threat. It turned out not to be the case. It was an armed student who had discharged a weapon. But what was interesting about it was there were some children that were caught in the bathroom while this happened. So the school went on the lockdown, and the kids couldn't get back into the classroom, because once you lock that door, those teachers can't open that door. Or they should not open that door for anybody, including a 5-year-old kid. It's just the way the rules go. You can't jeopardize 30 kids in the classroom that are on lockdown for the one in the hallway. So it's the type of conversation. Well, the 2 police officers ran by, and so what did the 2 kids do? They just started running after the police officers because they were told to go for help. Well, it's one of the things I tell the teachers is that you should have a conversation, especially with your 5th graders and below, that if you're in a crisis, the police have a different job to do. So go find a custodian, go find an adult, go find somebody else, or just exit the building and find a nearby house or a neighbor or something like that. And what we're trying to get the kids to understand is that they need to allow certain people to do their jobs in those moments and not rely on them solely for themselves. In the Sandy Hook shooting, we had 6 kids that walked out of a classroom and went to a house in the area. And there's a saying, there's a horrible saying in law enforcement, is I'd rather tell you I don't know where your kid is than I know exactly where your kid is.
Yeah.
Because if I know exactly where they are, that's a bad thing. And so we can locate these kids later and stuff like that. But it's also one of the things that teachers should have a conversation with their kids. Hey, across the street is the city park, right? So we're all going to meet over. If anything ever happens, you have to leave the building, go to the city park, and that's where we'll find you at the playground. You can play on the playground until we get there, right? That's the type of stuff that if a teacher tells them that, then they're going to do that in the crisis. And then maybe now the office assistant or one of the assistant principals or somebody who doesn't have kids or a custodian, their job might be to go to the park and round up and corral any of the kids that show up there. That's the type of stuff that schools need to think about.
So from what you've seen, do you feel that schools are as prepared for this as they would be for a tornado or for a fire nationwide?
2 things. I would say no, and it's because they get their priorities mixed up. The one thing that they worry about the most is the thing they control the best, and that is the reunification plan. They love to focus on the reunification plan. They love to focus on, this is how we're going to get your kids back to the parents. We're going to sign them out, and every teacher has the list, and you take the list. Right. They love that because that's something they can control. What they don't have control of is where it's going to happen in the building and how do I get my building on lockdown quickly. So they need to focus more on training their teachers how to use the PA system. I can tell you, I walk into schools all the time, and as on my PowerPoint, I literally will ask the principal, I said, hey, what's the all call button number? What do you type in to do an all call? And then, I'm making it up, 9822 pound. And so I will literally, at the very first slide, like, hey, pop quiz, what is 9822? And half of them are looking at me like, I have no idea what that is. And I'm like, this is how you use the all call on your PA system. If you don't know this, how are you going to communicate that there's a threat in the building and this building needs to go on lockdown and in a crisis? And so those are the type of things schools need to do better, is making sure everybody does know that. And so that's one of the biggest things. The other thing too is designated whose responsibility it is to call 911. I always say that, hey, it's very difficult if you're in the middle of a threat to actually get on the PA system, call 911 at the same time, and run for safety, right? So what you do is you find some office assistants and maybe some of your dietary people and say, if we get an all-call lockdown, I want a custodian, this particular custodian, I want this person in the dietary, and I want these two people in the front office. All four of you are responsible for calling 911. Right. So you get to someplace safe and you call 911. And then the principal and the assistant principal, somebody else, you're the ones that are responsible for doing the PA system. So if you delegate like 5 people to do one thing and 5 to do the other, you know that in a crisis, it's going to get accomplished by somebody, right? And that's the type of stuff we're talking about, that schools need to focus more on that. And then the other thing too they need to do is make sure that the law enforcement officers know basic terminology about like what the West Wing is, or the green hallway, or the blue hallway, right? So get with your school resource officer. The thing that I encourage principals to do is to pick up the phone and call the local, police department or stub station or whatever, and say, hey, we'd like to invite your officers to swing by for lunch, right? So sit down with the kids, they talk to them for lunch.
Have a sloppy Joe.
Exactly. It is a wonderful bonding experience. And I'm not talking about the school resource officer. I'm talking about the field, the patrolman who's on the street or whatever, to just say, hey, show me out at the elementary school. I'm going to go grab lunch, right? And, maybe you do something special and you buy them a pizza or whatever, but they'll eat the food. Trust me, I was in law enforcement for 20 years. We never pass up a free lunch. And so that's the type of stuff that you need to do, because then kids are used to seeing officers in the school, but then the officers start to get the lay of the land. They start to understand the nooks and crannies and the hallways and how it goes. And then they start walking through. And what we really want is, I don't know how, here in the Midwest, we have a convenience store and they give away free sodas. McDonald's is notorious for giving away free meals. And people are like, why do they do that? And they're like, because it is a deterrent to crime. Because when you give police officers soda and there's 30 police officers in an area, at any given point, somebody's going to be stopping by to go to the bathroom and grab a drink, right? So it's like, for pennies for soda, they are getting random security in the building. We want the same thing for our schools. And that's the type of thing too, is I can tell you from years of patrol, especially in the wintertime, there are, the calls for service ebb and flow. Start encouraging those principals that, hey, we haven't seen any officers in the building lately. We'd love for them to just come in and say, hey, yeah, come in, warm up, use the restroom, stuff like that. Show where the staff is. Maybe show them that there's a couple sodas or something, or in the teachers' lounge, and encourage them to just kind of swing by just the way they do that. I'll be honest with you, in law enforcement, you go either to the certain convenience stores or the hospital. That's where you go to the bathroom. It's always nice. It's always nice to have a school that you can rely on too.
Yeah, well, I think through all the turmoil we've had, that socialization of the police officers, knowing the kids, knowing the school is good for everyone. One last area I want to touch on is this the effect that it has on the teachers. We're asking these teachers, they didn't come from any kind of law enforcement background. Very few of them are trained in any way or have the kind of emotional background to be ready for this type of thing. Do you think we ask too much from our teachers to be prepared for these situations?
Well, my personal opinion, and I want you to understand, I am a full supporter of the Second Amendment, but when it comes down to certain things, I want people to understand the teacher's role should be to just protect the students within their charge at that moment. So getting the classroom locked down, getting the lights off, getting the windows covered if you have that, and getting the students into the safer corner, putting desks on their side so they have a little bit of ballistic shielding. Beyond that, teachers should not have a role in trying to neutralize or engage with somebody that is intent on violence. That is clearly a law enforcement role, and it should stay that way. They are the ones that are equipped and trained to handle that type of situation. And so I totally agree with you that it is getting, gets to be a little too much for the teachers, but it depends on how much we put on them. If all they have to do is protect themselves and their students, I think they can do it, right? But that protection comes from conversations. And this is where it's kind of, as like a simple wrap up. the parents need to be going to those teacher conferences and say, how do you feel the school's doing for safety? And if a teacher starts to say, well, I really don't feel good because I've asked for this and I've asked for that, now I'm going to be an advocate for my teacher, my children's teacher, to say to the principal and the school board, why aren't you providing this? Why don't they have these sort of things? Why don't they have some sort of panic button in their classroom? That's the type of stuff that my company works with. We do a lot of things. Why don't they have training? Why haven't they brought people in? Why don't they see more police officers walking the hallway, just as that sort of general deterrence? Those are the type of things the schools can do that almost cost minimal amounts that they're not doing, because it just falls in line with, we're too worried about all the COVID procedures. We're spending money on these temperature check machines. We're putting plexiglass everywhere, all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, okay, that's good. I mean, I guess in some level that's okay. But what we need to make sure we're doing is we're focusing on all the threats. You mentioned it. The biggest issue with COVID right now, and we are seeing it in the school, in the shootings that keep happening, is that now that people are reacclimating themselves to social situations, we are finding that some people can't handle it, and they are expressing their frustration through violence. We are going to see that in schools. This is the worst time of year for schools, because the end of the school year is kind of, for certain people that might have issues that they want to resolve, this might be a last opportunity to settle some scores, and we've seen that. The other thing is that the beginning of the school year is there. And the reason that is some kid shows up to school, he starts getting bullied that first week or two of school and says, you know what? I'm a freshman or a sophomore. I'm not doing another 3-4 years of this stuff. I'm settling the scores now. We've seen too much of that. And so that's when teachers need, unfortunately, take this stuff seriously. And then the biggest thing is that they need to have a good communication with their students, kind of on a small group thing. Say, hey, if you hear anything that's happening on TikTok, if you hear something on Instagram, if there's something gets posted, don't think it's a joke. These things, there are no jokes. You've got to tell me. And having that relationship with your children, that they'll tell you if they hear something on TikTok, or if they, if the children don't have the relationship with their own parents, and maybe they need to have it with the schools. But I can tell you, there are 3 times in my children's career that I have called the school on a threats of suicide that were made over social media posts, because I said I was concerned about this. And here's the thing I would tell parents to do is, you take your phone and take a photo of their phone. So now, because sometimes on TikTok, I can't remember them all, but in Instagram, I think if you take a screenshot of it, notifies the person that that you took a screenshot of the message they put out there. But if I take a photo of my kid's phone and the screen, I've captured it, so that I can forward it to school. But the student, the perpetrator, is never alerted. And so there's lots of things we can do as parents. It's just being more present in our own children's lives and having these conversations is what I would stress so much.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter how you feel about the Second Amendment, I think we're all worried about the fact that frustration plus availability of guns is not a good combination, whether it's an adult or a kid who's been bullied or whatever is the situation. So tell me just briefly about what Self-Defend does for the schools, what services and products you provide.
So Safe Defend works with schools. Right. Yeah, so that's great. Safe Defend works with schools, businesses, and government entities. And basically what we do is we provide an alarm notification system that we use a fingerprint activated module. So imagine in a school, every staff member, every teacher, every custodian, every support person has their fingerprints in our system. And if a crisis happens, they put their finger on the system that's in the classroom, and it immediately sets off alarms throughout the school. It sends out text and email alerts to everybody within the school, including law enforcement and dispatch. And it has a call center that picks up the phone and calls dispatch down to the room number. It says room 320, blue hallway, southeast corner of the building, active shooter threat. And so then what happens is that within seconds, every person in that building knows that there's a threat. So then they go on lockdown. Everybody knows exactly where in the building the threat is, so that if they're, say, on the other side of a large high school, they may choose, because now they know where the threat is, they may choose to leave out the west side and head out for the convenience store. but law enforcement knows exactly where in that building they need to go. So they're not doing the typical thing where they get a 911 call and they come to the front office and they say, what's going on? And the front office says, we don't know either. We heard it or something like that. And that's what's unfortunately happened way too many times, things like Parkland and things like that, where it just took too long to get the information out. It's fingerprint activated to prevent any sort of malicious activation. Children can sit there and touch it all day long. Nothing happens because they're not in the system. And so then that way we do that. We also have the safety box, and within there we have some tools to protect the classroom. What we call, you and I just talked about what the teacher's role is. What we do is we equip the teachers to protect the door, that if, say, most of these classroom doors have a little bit of a window in them. And so if that window broke and a hand started coming through that window, you can't just let that person get to the door. You've got to protect it. So we give them tools to defend the classroom, protect the threshold of that classroom. The goal is to keep the perpetrator away with the entire building on lockdown. We've seen this before. Santa Fe, New Mexico. Aztec, New Mexico. The shooting there. The janitor ran down the hallways yelling lockdown, 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 and the perpetrator was never able to get into any classrooms. And fortunately for him, I believe by the time the police got there, he neutralized himself. But he only unfortunately injured 2 students that he found in the hallway. Everybody else was saved by the idea that they were on the other side of a locked door. So our system, what it does is, if you can just imagine it, it's a fire alarm for an active shooter type situation. It immediately notifies law enforcement. It immediately notifies everybody in the building. And once you've activated, all you need to do is protect yourself and your students. So in 1 second, we've got the entire cavalry coming, and all you have to do is lock down and know that law enforcement's en route.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has really been interesting. As I said, it's not a conversation I wanted to have, but I really appreciate you putting the danger, the risk into perspective, because I think it looms large, like everything that grabs the headlines. It makes it sound like it could happen any day. It's very, very likely that it'll never touch your family and your school. But if it did, you'd want to make sure that the teachers are ready for it, just as they would be for disasters that we are also ready for, like tornadoes and fires. So, Doug, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Paul. One of the things I just want to say real quick is just understand that studies have shown that talking with students does not increase the propensity for violence. That's a misnomer. So talking with your kids does not mean that they're more likely to do this, or that they now know the plan and they're going to thwart it. And so please have parents, if you have the opportunity to sit down with your kids and just have simple conversations about where exits are and things like that. Thanks
for adding that. I mean, communication, openness is really key in just so many situations. So again, this is Paul Banis of GreatDad.com. If you're interested in our coaching services for new and older dads, you can find more at greatdad.com/coaching, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again.